Once we were doing the routines in the nightclub, which we actually filmed here in LA in a
Right.
strip mall, I was so green at the time that when Steven Soderbergh's name was stitched onto the side of the camera,
Yeah.
I thought it was because he had helped to create that camera. I didn't know it was because he owned it, and that when you own the camera,
Yeah.
whatever it was, the red or whatever, they'll put your name on
Oh,
it.
that's
But when I told that embarrassingly, hat in hand, to Steven, he was like, well, actually I did. They did ask me about a few things when they were developing it, so I wasn't totally off. But I was very green, and I didn't know why all these people were at the monitor, and sure enough, before we even went to Tampa, we found out that there was like a bidding war going on between studios, and I thought, wow, I did not know that this many people were going to see me in this movie. Careful. You don't want to burn that sensitive Irish skin.
Are we going now?
Yeah, I have to get back.
Back to leaving in the middle of the night. Sneaking down the stairs, lying.
Skippy, everybody lies about something. You and me, we lie about who we sleep with. I know it hurts you. Because you're good. And sweet. But the lying gets easier. Eventually it doesn't hurt as much. Because you have no choice.
Welcome to the Actor's Side today. He's having quite a run lately with Fellow Travelers, which is a limited series in which he stars, of course, Maestro, which he co-starred with Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan. I've even heard rumors about White Collar. I'm going to ask you this. So many things that Matt Bomer is doing. Welcome, Matt, to the Actor's Side.
Thank you, Pete. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Fellow Travelers just gotten phenomenal reviews, and I mean, it's something ever since it went on. It's had some award nominations already, and there's a lot of Emmy buzz. And it's an important project, I think, for you. I think the character's fascinating, Hawkins.
Yeah.
He's not, that sympathetic in a lot of ways.
No.
He's a complicated character, and
Yeah.
it's from the book. Actually, Fellow Travelers. Had you
Yes.
read the book? Did you know what you were getting into here before?
Yeah, I did. They brought Robbie Rogers, our producer, and Ron Niswaner, who wrote the show, brought the book to me early on in the pandemic, and they said we thought this would be a great limited series. Obviously, the series broadens out from the world of the book in many ways, but I read it in about 2 days, and I said, yes, I want to be on board this, and then we went about the somewhat arduous task of getting it made and sold and all those things. And so I just fell in love with the source material from the word go.
Yeah, it's you and Jonathan Bailey, who is the other main actor in this, spanned several decades, all the way from the 50s, and very interesting politics in it, too, all the way through the AIDS crisis in the 80s.
Yeah. It's the political landscape is obviously was so informative to me. I didn't understand. I had somewhat of a passing understanding of the Lavender Scare, and certainly we all know about the McCarthy era trials and all those, but I didn't have a lived understanding of what it meant, and the fact that an estimated 10,000 people lost their jobs for being potentially LGBTQ. Many people took their own lives. I mean, it had a real impact on the world of DC at the time, and obviously our community at large.
That's what I didn't know anything about the Lavender Scare. I knew everything I thought I knew about the McCarthy hearings, and of course Roy Cohn, who basically mentored Donald Trump.
Yes.
So you keep hearing Roy Cohn's name.
Yeah.
He was an evil guy.
Yeah.
But also a tragic figure. I think.
Yeah, and I think that's really summed up beautifully. The last image from the show, not to be giving too many spoilers away.
We want people to watch it.
Okay,
as well.
good. Well, then maybe I shouldn't say too much, but there is a moment in the last scene of the show that I think pays tribute to what a complicated and dark person he was, but also the fact that he was also a tragic figure.
Yeah. I mean, he's an interesting guy. Movies have been made about him. James Woods played him, actually.
Well, yeah, and
things
obviously
like that,
Angels in America, he's such an
Angels
iconic
in
role
America.
in that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So for you, in developing this role and in playing this role, what were you looking at as a character to create here?
Well, it was so fascinating just to get to play such a multi-layered role. You know, typically you're thinking about the aspects of the character that you relate to, and this is a character who really leads with a lot of shadowier aspects. So I almost had to invert the process because he is unapologetically cut and dry in many ways that most of the characters I play aren't. And it's actually the more appealing aspects of him are the ones that he keeps hidden and are cloaked. So it was almost like inverting the typical process of a character.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're trying to get into understanding what his day-to-day life was in the 50s and what that world was and what people's point of view was, what the climate was in DC at the time, what the stakes were for him. And I felt like I had certain aspects, obviously not to the same degree from my upbringing in rural Texas, that I could kind of parlay into certain parts of it. And he does a lot of code switching, and certainly as a gay leading man, that's something I've understood that I've had to do at high stakes levels for much of my life. So I had some things to draw on, but it was really understanding the world and the political climate over the decades.
Yeah.
And then obviously just the work you put into aging a character over those 4 decades.
I know, because
as
you get to
well.
be aged and the whole thing with makeup. Of course, you were at the same time doing Maestro.
Yeah.
You know, where
Yeah, I'd literally just come from the set where I got to see Bradley and Carrie do it, and we both had that precarious task of aging through middle age, which is a very subtle gradation. It's not like you're suddenly walking with a cane and you're covered in wrinkles, but it's actually just a subtle change. But I thankfully have great people in my life of all ages who I was able to draw from and study, and you realize that people in the early 60s aren't infirm. They're actually quite active and able-bodied. It's just so you're trying to make subtle changes.
Yeah, and it was subtle too, because the whole show opens up with you older.
Yes,
and,
yeah.
You know, and so then you had
I was like, let's just rip this Band-Aid right off.
right away.
Yeah. I think it was a smart way to do it, to just rip that Band-Aid and then work backwards.
Oddly enough, to me, it's it's a gay romance. It's all of that that's talking about people being closeted and everything else at that time and what you're going through. It also was a universal romance, I thought. You know what? It reminded me in a weird way of The Way We Were, because I'm watching that and you see that go through all of its complications and this yin and yang.
I used to call this project The Gay We Were. Because it is a multi-decade romance where these people are coming together and falling apart for reasons that are obviously a huge part of them personally, but also societal reasons that are keeping them apart as well. And because I think what's specific to this project is that so much of who they are and what they bring to the table in terms of the relationship and the way they connect intimately has to do with societal conditioning and their response to that societal conditioning. And I think Hawk really chose to go one way, Tim really chose to go another, but when they connect, it's actually therapeutic for both of them in a way.
It is, and there was clearly something there, a magnet between them, that no matter what society did to them. It's really interesting. This could not have been made in the period it's set in, really. Not in Hollywood, not as honestly.
I don't know if it would have been made 15 years ago.
It may not have been. I mean, there were things. Famously, there was a project called The Front Runner that they interviewed every leading man, Paul Newman, all these people, and they just couldn't get there. Couldn't. It was just famous. And now I look at this, I think it's changed a lot for the better now. It's better now.
I think so. I think there's been a lot of progress made. And you look at a role like this, and that's just so multifaceted and nuanced and has so many complications. And anytime you're playing a character whose greatest fear is love, there's just so much to mine there. And I think even 10 years ago, I don't know that I would have had the opportunity to play the role. So even just the fact that I'm always a best person for the job wins guy, but just the fact that folks are getting opportunities and that we had the people at Fremantle and Paramount Plus and Showtime get behind this the way they did is just, it's mind-blowing to me. Having been in the business for about 30 years now, there was a part of me that was a little bit not pessimistic, but maybe a little cynical, but I think I was just protecting my heart because I love the project so much, but I thought, okay, they bought it, but is this really going to get made? Because to make any period piece, is so expensive. It requires such an investment. And then Ron just wrote these scripts that I felt were undeniable. And when the creatives and the studio execs read them, they just thought, okay, well, we have to make this. So we were very fortunate, and I do think that we've come a long way. And obviously, when you're working on something like this, you're always like, oh, just don't let me drop the ball, so that other people get the chance to do it as well. And hopefully, we were able to honor the work in such a way that folks after us will get the chance to tell these kinds of stories as well.
I think so too. And what I think is interesting now too, there's a lot of talk. People say, if you've got a blind character, you got to cast a blind person. If you got a deaf person, you got to, and there's a lot to that. If you're playing a gay person on screen, the actor has to be gay. I personally think an actor can play anything they want, any way. But in this case, both of you are out as gay. And do you think that adds a different layer of authenticity to this, or does it matter?
I think on this project specifically, it did.
Yeah.
It lent itself to a real shorthand and a real comfort. There were, and I'm not saying it's that way on every job, but there was something about every single person involved, from the actors to the costume designers to the production designers, to the hair and makeup team, had a real personal investment in the story. And that can come from all different kinds of ways. It just happened to be the circumstance that everybody was also from our community on this project. But I think even particularly in the scenes with Johnny and I, we had to do a great deal of intimacy and really intense intimacy in a way on the scene that required a lot of vulnerability. And I think the fact that we had a trust for each other and an understanding of certain things, I just feel like it helped on this. And I think we had lived experiences that were really deeply personal that helped us understand the characters in a way. And that's not to say that other people wouldn't as well. I just felt like on this job, it came through in the work.
The sex scenes that you're referring to there all seem to me to be viable. They're there to move the story along. You can tell, actually, there's great character development within them, which doesn't always happen when they just toss those into a movie or something.
You hit the nail on the head. That's always the question I'm asking when there's an intimacy scene. I go, is this explicit? Is it just a formality? Why is it in the story? And the characters in these scenes were never the same after the scenes as they were before the scenes. So to me, they were an integral part of the storytelling. And like I said, so much of their conditioning that pertained to their romantic life came from society and their upbringing and the times they grew up in. And the environment they grew up in. So to me, it was so character indicative and also just essential to the progression of the story and their relationship.
And as we've talked before,
it doesn't make them any easier to do.
No. But it gives you a reason.
Get underneath them.
I think psychologically you feel like it's good. Maestro, you had scenes in that too. I mean, here you're filming these two major kinds of roles, and also period pieces that are there,
span
which
multiple
is
decades.
kind of from a perspective of acting in that is interesting. There.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's sometimes, as an actor, if you're fortunate enough to and Maestro I screen tested for and did all those things on Zoom, but you can kind of attract these clusters of things that can be similar in your work. I have another similar thing going on now, but it's interesting why they come into your life at a specific time. And these were projects that were about love that couldn't express itself to its fullest because of the times people lived in, because of the people involved in the relationships, because of societal implications. And so it was interesting to get to explore two completely different characters
Right.
under those same circumstances.
Yeah, because David Oppenheim, and not to be confused with Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
It's just a coincidence in
Just
the
a
same
coincidence.
year. But David was a very poignant character.
Oh, he was open. He was wide open to
Yeah,
all, and
you know?
just and Lenny was the son to him.
Yeah.
And then you switch over to Hawkins, who is so closed off in that
Right.
regard. So it was really a fun exercise, and there were these beautiful letters on the Library of Congress webpage between David and Lenny over the course of their entire lives and careers. They were in touch, and so I even hand wrote out all the ones that took place in the time, the window of time that our movie took place in, and I would even give some to Bradley on the day we were filming if it pertained to the scene we were working on. But there was such a great insight into the world of those characters. There's almost like a lot of the backstory work you have to do imaginatively with a character that's fictionalized was kind of done for us in a way.
Yeah, it's really great. And what I was really impressed with Maestro too is with limited screen time, because you're
Yeah.
not the two main characters there, and
No.
you're coming in, you really created a three-dimensional character that stays
Wow.
with you as a viewer watching
Well,
it.
thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It's hard to do, but I will say that Bradley, it's such a testament to Bradley as a director and a collaborator. Watching him work on this and switch hats so seamlessly, he was always in service of whoever was on screen at the time, and he just wanted them to shine through. He was so selfless in that regard, and there are very few directors who will leave the camera on your face in this day and age when you don't have dialogue.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the magic of film acting.
Yeah.
Because it's oftentimes what's happening in between what we're saying to each other, maybe not in this format, but in a scene in life says just as much about what's going on as when we're speaking.
Absolutely. That's
So,
the beginning of screen acting was in silent movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And
We've lost sight of that a little bit in some regards because there's so much editing and.
Yeah.
But I feel like great directors like Bradley really understand if you have something real that's going on in between what you're saying, and so I'm very grateful that he left all of what I did in the film, and we added a little bit in here and there afterwards. So.
Yeah, I always love those stories about actors who go, okay, look at the script, how many lines do I have? Count your lines. You realize that may not be the key to your role.
It's not, by the way, and it can also be a temptation early on when you're a young actor to go, oh, in this scene I'm just walking into the building.
Right.
But actually in that moment, in that 1/8 of a page, it may say as much about your character as the next expository 5-page scene.
Yeah, that's so interesting
Yeah.
to me. Okay, let me throw the name Neil Caffrey at you. And well, actually, as we speak here, this is going to Netflix, White Collar.
Yes.
Which you did for several years.
Yeah,
on
6
USA
seasons.
yeah.
USA, back in
And
the
this is
Blue
like
Skies days.
Well, look, did you know this could happen? I mean, like Suits too was
Yeah.
there, and that became a phenomenon
Yeah,
suddenly when it
yeah.
goes to Netflix. And the same thing is happening now as White Collar, which has been on Hulu as well, but
Yeah.
is going to Netflix.
White Collar was actually one of the first series that came to Netflix back when all they had was Orange is the New Black.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that it actually garnered a whole new fan base early because it was happening at the same time that we were still running the show, just older seasons. So people were finding the show as the show was still running. It was very early on in those days for
That's
Netflix.
interesting.
And so we're coming back, and we've been on pretty much every platform since. So it's been great because there have constantly been new eyes on the show for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
I just feel like while it's great to have all these complicated characters and super serialized shows that are so hyper specific to certain audiences, there's that place in the market for blue skies television with just a little bit of edge that
I know.
that people seem to still be hungry for.
I think
And
they
so-
totally are, and it's
Yeah.
great to, as you say, it's being rediscovered and rediscovered, which you never know when you're doing a series that it's going to have that kind
No.
of a.
I mean, I try to treat all the work the same, no matter what I'm doing, even if it's one scene in a movie or if it's every scene in a miniseries. But we had no idea. We were all just so grateful. It was a perfect job because the set dynamics and the life on set was so convivial and joyful, and everyone had been around the block enough to really appreciate the fact that they had something special. And we had these great veteran actors like Diane Carroll and Willie Garson and Tim DeKay, and just the chemistry was just so easy.
Yeah.
And
he's a great character that you were playing too.
A great character, and again, a multidimensional guy who had a very different public face than a private face, and his own set of tragic flaws that conflicted with those things and what he wanted.
Con guy and everything else.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. So, is there a possibility that this may get revived beyond that? I mean, with a new White Collar reboot?
Yeah, it is possible. It is, I mean, I guess it's technically in the works. You know, these things are never quite as easy as you want them to be, and pretty much all of that is out of our control, my control. Yeah. But it seems to be that they are moving in the right direction, and that it could be a very real thing within the next year or two.
Wow, that's great. And you've turned to producing, I noticed, quite a bit too. You're executive producer on Fellow Travelers, and you've been developing projects too and things, and so I'm sure you'd be involved as a producer.
Yeah,
on White Collar
I produced on White Collar maybe the last 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah.
But this would be, I would say, a little bit more of a hands-on producer.
Is producing important to you now at this point in your career?
It is, especially on certain projects, because, and look, I kind of get in where I fit in as a producer when I'm also talent involved in the project. Yeah. But just having done it for a while, I feel like I have a great set of relationships and people that I've worked with, that I love working with, that I like collaborating with, that I can bring to the table. Yeah. And I feel like I have an understanding of what their skill sets are, and whether they would shine on a certain project or not. And I like, I try not to get too hands-on in the casting, but I like to come in and work with everybody and then let the people decide what they decide. But I think it's an important step, and it's also just important to be a part of something from the get-go. I actually love somewhat of a luxury of a project like Fellow Travelers that I've been with for 4.5 years now, where the character's marinating in your subconscious for a long time. Yeah. So there's so much work that's there that you can just trust. You still do all the same work you do, but because it's been simmering on the back burner for a while, it's there when the cameras are rolling. And so if you're afforded that luxury to come on something early and really be with it for a stretch of time, I feel like it can be a really beneficial thing as an actor as well. And there are just stories that I want to be told. Right. And if I can lend my voice in any regard, I'm producing a Lawrence vs. Texas film with Steven Soderbergh right now that I think is a really special project that I think is important for the world to see. So,
are you in it too? Or?
Amy Simons is directing, and I said, look, I'm a utility player on this one. I will, wherever you need me, get the budget you need. Right. I'll get in where I fit in. This is not a vanity project. I just want the story out there, so let me know. So I imagine I'll be in it in some regard. What the extent of that is, I don't know.
Cool. Okay, we're going to play lightning round before we have to go here, because I've got to ask you about some of these roles you did.
Okay.
So 2006, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, which is probably the 5th or 6th Texas
God
Chainsaw.
Knows. God knows, Pete.
Doing a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I was doing Grey Gardens off Broadway in New York, which was like the height of art to me. And the folks at Platinum Dunes came in, and I did a work session with Michael Bay, and they asked me to test for it, and I had a great experience with Michael. And he was like, I really want you to do this film. And I mean, talk about having to choose between art and commerce. But, when you're in your whatever I was, early mid-20s at the time, leading roles in film are hard, especially in that one that has a studio behind it. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do a genre film, I'm from Texas. This is folkloric in terms of Texas life, so maybe this is the one to venture into. And it ended up being, it was an educational experience for sure, and I had a great time, and I love the cast, and so.
So cool. You've done so much stuff. Obviously, Magic Mike, you've done 3 films now, and there's the Soderbergh connection again.
Yeah.
And that was a wildly different, but so
Wildly
successful.
different. And we had no idea. I thought I was signing on to do the Girlfriend Experience because it was a completely
totally
self-financed, tiny independent film at the time. I can't remember what the budget was in the first one, but it wasn't high.
Yeah.
And I think Channing and Steven basically paid for it.
Yeah.
So I thought, and I still do, I think Channing's a great actor and a really exciting movie star to get to work with. I was so excited to work with Matthew. And at the time, Steven said that it might be his last film.
Yeah.
And I'd always wanted to work with Steven Soderbergh. So I thought, well, I better get in while I can.
Yeah.
And then it, by the time I think we were, maybe, once we were doing the routines in the nightclub, which we actually filmed here in LA in a strip mall.
Oh, wow.
And then we did the exteriors in Tampa, in adjacent areas. But when we were doing those scenes, I kept seeing all these suits at the monitor. And I was so green at the time. I was so green at the time that when Steven Soderbergh's name was stitched onto the side of the camera, I thought it was because he had helped to create that camera. I didn't know it was because he owned it, and that when you own the camera, whatever it was, the red or whatever, they'll put your name on it.
That's
but when I told that embarrassingly, hat in hand, to Steven, he was like, well, actually they did ask me about a few things when they were developing it, so I wasn't totally off. But I was very green, and I didn't know why all these people were at the monitor, and sure enough, before we even went to Tampa, we found out that there was like a bidding war going on between studios, and I thought, wow, I did not know that this many people were going to see me in this movie.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Normal Heart, you were nominated for an Emmy for supporting in a movie or miniseries at the time against 3 of your co-stars.
Yeah.
So there were 4 of you, so you all canceled yourself out, I guess, because none of you won. But but it was a wonderful performance in a terrific film, which did win the Emmy.
Yeah.
Was that the beginning of the relationship with Ryan Murphy in terms of all these projects you've done that he's produced, like Glee and American Horror Story and on and on?
It was in some ways, because it was the first meeting I had with him.
Yeah.
At the time, it was going to be a feature film. And Julia and Mark were already attached. So, and then he kind of screen tested me in a roundabout way. He would say, come and do this episode of Glee. And then I would do that. And he'd say, come and do this episode. And so I was doing little things here and there where I think he was watching maybe what my work was like and just getting intel, or who knows, or maybe he was just like, hey, I like working with you. And so then I remember him calling me and saying, hey, HBO wants to do it. This is going to be, are you okay if this is going to be? And I was like, yeah, this is perfect. I think they're the perfect home for this. They'll give it the support it needs, the platform it needs. And, it was an incredible experience. I lost 50 pounds.
I know.
I still haven't totally recovered from.
Really? I was going to say, how is, I know, I've talked to a lot of actors that have just lost this weight and then put it back on and things, and I think, is that healthy, or,
it would have to be something really special to ever do something that extreme again.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't change it for the world. It was worth it to me. I really felt like I owed my life to Larry Kramer, because when I read his plays when I was 14, 15 in high school. I honestly feel like they were so educated. Nobody in Spring, Texas was talking about what was going on with the AIDS crisis. I had no idea. Wow. And so I feel like, in a way, they probably saved my life just by informing me what was going on in the world at large. And I felt like I owed so much to my community and the generation that we lost that I would do it again in a heartbeat for that role. But my circulation never quite came back the same in my hands. And that's okay, but we just have to be something really special to do it again.
It took decades for that to finally get made.
I
mean, that was famously in so many different hands.
So many hands. I've heard the stories.
So, I mean, props to Ryan Murphy
absolutely.
And all of you.
Thank you, Ryan.
For doing that.
And trusting me in that role. I hadn't, I'd done White Collar, but I hadn't done anything of that scope emotionally
Yeah.
on screen before, and for whatever reason he saw, I think that's what makes Ryan brilliant, is that he can see things in people that no one else can, or maybe they can't even see in themselves.
It's amazing. Yeah. And of course, American Horror Story, and I could go on and on with everything you've done here.
My first job, which not a lot of people know about, and it's not on my IMDb page, and I wish it were.
Oh, what?
I was a background artist in a Chuck Norris movie, and the late Jonathan Brandis, may he rest in peace, called Sidekicks.
Uh-huh.
They had come to Houston, and they did an open invite for background artists, and my friend's mom knew that I was into drama. My parents were like, "Go play outside. You're not getting an agent. We're not getting you headshots." And but his mom knew I loved competing in forensics, and I was doing well in those competitions. And it's a very odd name for drama competitions that they use in Texas. I don't know why they call it forensics. It sounds like a CSI spinoff, but yeah. So she brought us down there, and I got to meet Chuck Norris, and I was a background artist in that, and that was when I was in 7th grade.
Wow.
So I was 13.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You go back here
Yeah.
with your career, and of course soap operas and everything else, and
Yeah.
DC. You've done the world of
Yeah.
DC. That was
Yeah.
very successful.
That was a great
Doom,
gig, and
yeah.
a great show to be a part of, and great people to work with, and a really important character to get to play. I mean, I hate using the word important, but I just feel like that character has resonated with a lot of people, and I always know it's kind of a deep cut that really meant something to somebody if they approach me on the street and want to talk about Doom Patrol. It's a very
that's a
specific.
whole different fan base.
It is.
It completely is.
It is, yeah, and I think Doom Patrol is a whole different fan base from a typical DC show in some ways.
Yeah,
so.
I know. Yeah, it's sort of the the little brother there to the
Yeah.
other ones. But it's actually more character driven and more
Oh,
interesting.
it's completely character driven. It's so, I kept being like, thinking, when are they going to have superpowers?
I know.
Like, we're going to use our superpowers for good. When am I going to be flying from cranes? And there was a little bit of that here and there, but by and large, it was really character driven. And I would have to do, a lot of it was voiceover. And I would have to do, I remember being in, the booth and having to do these massively emotional scenes where I'd be crying and upset and snotting and all these things, and you're just by yourself in a booth. It was really naked in a lot of ways.
Wow. That's so funny.
But I feel like it really resonated with anyone who's ever felt like they were different or an outcast in any regard or ostracized for any reason, and I think that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and it's important.
Yeah.
It's important. Well, so fascinating. I could go on and on. Well, thank you for joining us on the actor's side, Matt Bomer. And
Thank you, Pete.
best of luck with everything you're doing in front of the screen and behind the screen
Thank
now,
you.
too. Very exciting.
Thanks, Pete. It's always great to talk to you.